In the last World Cup final, France, a nation of 67 million, faced off in the world's biggest sporting event against Croatia, a nation of just 4 million. With just a combined population of 71 million, the players on display were simply mind-boggling. Mbappe, Griezmann, Kanté, Pogba, Varane, and so many more on the French side. On the Croatian side, Modric, Rakitic, Mandzukic, Perisic, and again, even more. These squads include the midfield fulcrum of a 5-time Champions League winning Real Madrid generation in Modric, a treble-winning midfield powerhouse in Rakitic, the man who today is widely considered the heir to the throne of Messi and Ronaldo, at the peak of football in Mbappe, and the man with 3 lungs himself, N'Golo Kante. To put this in perspective, combined, they have the 20th largest population in the world, less than World Cup winners Germany and Brazil, let alone even the larger nations of the world. So, why have I been going on about population when talking about the World Cup final? Well, if we were to assume that population was the only factor in athletic success, one would reason that the countries with the highest populations would have a higher chance of success. A higher population should mean more people capable of scoring goals, making quality passes, good interceptions, keeping the ball, not making the keeper, and so on. More people who are taller, faster, and stronger. More people capable of just being good at football. But as we all know, the world is slightly, just slightly, more complicated than that. The 2 largest nations that account for 37% of all the people on Earth have a combined 1 World Cup appearance. 1. With 0 victories. The smallest country to ever win the World Cup, Uruguay, had a population of 1.7 million when they first won it in 1930. The smallest to ever qualify, Iceland, had a population of over 337,000 and still received more points than China when they qualified for a World Cup. But this article isn't about China, it's about India, and more specifically, why a nation with a higher population than Europe and South America combined has never once played a World Cup match. Here I'll be going over just why India, a nation with a GDP per capita and population comparable to the entire continent of Africa, has managed to produce not even a single competitor to Samuel Eto'o, George Weah, Yaya Toure, JJ Okocha, or Mohamed Salah in its entire history, and looks unlikely to do so in the near future. The standard response to this would be, well, Indians don't care. They care about cricket, so they win in cricket. And this is largely true. Cricket is by far the most popular sport in India. The Indian Premier League, India's domestic cricket league, or the IPL for short, with just 8 teams, has an average attendance of over 30,000, the 7th highest of any outdoor sports league in the world, and higher than any football league, bar the English Premiership. The Indian Super League, one of India's 2 football leagues, I'll touch on that in a bit, clocks in at just under 13,000. Yeah, it's not great. The ISL also only has a presence of 17 of India states. Now 17 sounds like a lot, and judging by the number itself, it is, but 8 are covered by one single club, Northeast United. And these states, they account for only 45 million people, which I mean, if you're from Europe, that'll sound like a lot, but that's only 3.8% of the population of India. If we look at the 5 largest states, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Bihar, West Bengal, and Madhya Pradesh, only Maharashtra and West Bengal have ISL clubs, Mumbai City and Mohun Bagan, and East Bengal. Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, states that are estimated to be home to 1 in 3 of India's youth, have nada ISL clubs between them. In fact, if we look at the 22 Indian cities with populations of over 1 million, only 6 even have a single ISL team. If we include India's second tier, the I-League, which up till this year was in and of itself another top-tier league, the number goes up to 9. What this means is that in the 22 largest cities in the country with over 1 million people apiece, only 6 have a top-flight football club, and only 9 have one in the highest 2 tiers of the Indian football pyramid. By contrast, looking at English urban areas, the top 10, moving from Greater London down to Bristol, all had at least one club in the top 2 tiers of English football, with many obviously having multiple. Hell, even looking at a country where football isn't the most predominant sport, Japan, we see the exact same story. The top 10 urban unemployment areas, as defined by the Japanese government, all have clubs in either the J1 or J2 leagues. Now, we've all been on football Twitter and seen the Indian fans of European mega clubs, the Indian fans of Barcelona, Real Madrid, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester United, PSG, etc., etc. Seems like we're everywhere. So clearly, at least some of us care about football, even if the domestic game looks a bit lacking, as we've seen here. But how much is this section of football fans out of the general population? Well, spoiler alert, not a lot. Out of an estimated 136 million Indian sports fans, meaning someone who watched sports either on TV or on OTT streaming platforms for 30 minutes in the past month as an active viewer, 23 million, or 17%, watched football. Now, this number might be a tad low, though. It was estimated that 155 million watched the English Premier League, and for the World Cup, 111 million people were estimated to watch the matches, with 231 million impressions on social media. So clearly there's at least some passion for football in India. But if we consider the World Cup and Premier League viewership figures, we only get 8% and 11% of the population respectively. And if we look at the Cricket World Cup, 509 million. Yes, 509 million unique viewers and 793 million impressions. Absolutely insane. The Indian Premier League, India's domestic cricket league, 424 million viewers. See, the numbers are impressive for football, nothing wrong with them, but next to cricket, they're nothing. One small caveat to add, though: for the World Cup, 58% of viewership comes from just a few select areas of the nation. West Bengal at 20%, Kerala at 16%, Maharashtra and Goa at 12%, the Northeast at 10%. So that's 58% of viewership put together when these states only account for less than a quarter of the population. So the passion for football is clearly concentrated in some areas, which is pretty evident when you look at things like the Kolkata Derby, the popular amateur football tournament in Kerala, and the sheer amount of Indian national team players who come from states like Goa in the Northeast. India just doesn't have the same amount of clubs and academies that many other countries of smaller sizes have. England, a nation 1/24 the size of India, had 40,000 football clubs registered with the FA, the most in the world. Brazil, a country 1/6 the size, not far behind, 29,000. India, an estimated 7,000. Barely even a sixth of England's total, and barely even a fourth of Brazil's, despite being a country with a population 6 or even 24 times larger. With regards to total registered players, India didn't even rank in the top 20 in the world. Now, this measure doesn't correlate well with success, to be fair. The US, Japan, Canada, they all rank in the top 10, for God's sakes. But it does go to show how little engagement with the game, even at the grassroots level, there is in the country. India does look slightly better at the total number of youth players with an estimated 314,000, but this pales in comparison to, say, America's 3.9 million, with a quarter of the population. In fact, when we compare India's total to Argentina's total, India does come out slightly on top, 314,000 versus 231,000 youth footballers, but when we compare it on a per capita basis, the difference is staggering and much more skewed in Argentina's favor. Argentina comes out miles on top. India, on the other hand, is ludicrously worse, with a youth footballer for roughly every 3,800 people. This means that on a per capita basis, Argentina has 22 times the number of youth playing football that India has. And a simple fact of the matter is, if you're going to become good at football, you need to actually play the game, or have enough clubs and teams for people to train and improve with proper guidance, nutrition, fitness, knowledge, and so on. While the sum totals don't look too bleak when considering the massive gulf in population between India and literally any other nation that isn't China, the figures look depressingly inadequate, and they are. If so few clubs exist on a per-person basis, this leads to so few people playing football on a per-person basis, which means that only a tiny, tiny sliver of the population actually ever gets any exposure to football. But even this tiny sliver doesn't seem that unimpressive when it comes to sheer numbers. Surely there should still be enough to find 11 world-class or at least half-decent players to take Indian football somewhere. But again, as I said earlier, this lack of availability per capita of players and coaches would still be a problem, because that means that knowledge and expertise needed to mold good football players would be in such short supply on a societal level, and it would make this knowledge and expertise difficult to find and actually used productively. Just about anything right you think should be done isn't being done. In fact, the reverse is happening more often than not. If India is ever to seriously become competitive in football, there need to be enough qualified coaches to, actually coach the players. In this respect, India is failing horribly. And as always, when considering the per capita metrics, it looks comical. In total, India has 10,756 licensed coaches by either the AFC or AIFF for anything football related. And I mean literally anything. Like, this list includes goalkeeper license holders and people who take in, quote, online refresher courses. Make of that what you will. When we zero in specifically on A and pro licensed coaches, because it's by this metric that articles on the internet seem to use to compare coaching across countries, we end up with 208 holding the highest possible qualifications. 208 for a nation of over a billion people. Iceland at 209, with a population of Korba Chhattisgarh. England is a nation often cited as having a coaching problem by the media, but even so, they have 1,395 at either A or pro level. When we compare that to the gold standards of Spain and Germany, the figures look even more depressing, with 15,423 for Spain and over 6,400 for Germany. And when we factor gender into the equation, things only spiral further down for India. Only 669 women in the entire country are licensed coaches, a majority being D or lower license holders. Only 30 hold A or B licenses. 30. By contrast, Spain has 44 pro license holders who are women. Never mind A, pro license holders. Now, of course, men can still coach women's teams, and often they do. But considering just how overt, widespread, and unabashed Indian society can be with its sexism, it is much more likely that in India, a young girl footballer would be more open with and learn more from a fellow woman coach than in a country like, say, the United States, the most successful country in women's football, where these societal forces, while still existent, are much less overt. There is a distinct lack of planning by many coaches and many clubs, particularly those who only got there as ex-players when compared to foreign coaches, and a general disregard for young players, dumping them out of teams in favor of states that have more of a football culture like Bengal or the Northeast, or simply just preferring experienced players. If no one's going to take a chance on youth, then no youth will develop. It's as simple as that. Coaches at smaller teams that lack resources, they often have to perform financial, recruitment, psychological, nutritional, analytical functions, and even more on their own, which generally speaking, they're not capable of doing. Moving further down the pyramid to grassroots and youth coaches, there are tons of problems there as well. The C, D, and E licensed coaches, the ones who actually operate at the grassroots of Indian football, don't exactly perform their jobs well either. According to sports writer Arka Bhattacharya, in a Twitter thread on the subject, it is, quote, not difficult to generalize E, D, and C coaches in India either. They are either one or all of these, running commentary from the sidelines, berating/blaming the kids, always on the lookout for better players instead of producing homegrown, lack game and developmental plans, end quote. Yeah, so not very good at all. In summary, it's pretty damn difficult, if not impossible, to find qualified coaches in this country, and where they do exist, they still often do not have the necessary traits to actually succeed in developing talented players, especially at the grassroots level. This probably explains why it took 7 years for Khalid Jamil to become the first Indian to permanently manage an ISL club. He now manages in the I-League's second division, and even in the I-League, foreign coaches dominate, as can be seen in the chart below. This also probably explains why India has floundered at youth tournaments like the Under-17 World Cup that it hosted, where we lost all 3 matches and ended with a -8 goal differential. Not joking, you can look it up for yourself. The Under-20s have never even qualified for an Under-20 World Cup, and the Under-23s have never qualified for the Olympics. However, I would like to note that Manipur and Mizoram, 2 of India's 3 states that produce the most footballers, have only 9 A-licensed coaches between them. However, these states also have much more popular support for the game, as I said earlier, and have much more of a footballing culture. This brings us to the culture of football, following it, playing it, and upset the vast majority of India. Certainly not enough to produce the necessary problem this is, however, the problem of culture extends far beyond that. We as Indians simply don't like our kids playing sports, full stop. This is a fact and you know it. Let's not pretend that we're not brought into this world with a pen and paper thrust onto us as soon as possible. As a society, we highly value academic achievements and pursuits over anything that could result from sports. As the common saying goes, Padoge lukoge, banoge nawab, kheloge kudoge, hoge kharab. We're discouraged by society to pursue sports as a profession. I might be an NRI with the thickest possible accent, speaking Hindi, but here the attitude is just as prevalent among the Indian community as it is there. There's a reason you don't really find a lot of Indian athletes in any American professional sports or the English Premier League. Parents and families are supposed to be the people who guide us and encourage us to fulfill our potential. How well these institutions perform at these functions is questionable already, but it's safe to say that if a kid wants to play sports, they'll be getting a little to no encouragement or guidance from their parents. Compounding this is the issue of class. Football is overwhelmingly a working class sport, not like cricket or even golf. However, working class parents and families are perhaps the most liable to this type of mindset. Generally speaking, a working class family is more likely to force their kids into a coaching institute for a competitive exam like the JEE and forbid them from playing a sport than a richer, more financially secure family who isn't living with economic insecurity and doesn't have to burden their kids with the duty of financially supporting them. Now, I'm not blaming the working class for having this type of mentality. India is a vastly unequal society where the income of the richest 10% has grown rapidly, far outpacing what the bottom half makes. Combining this with comparatively lackluster income growth and the sorry state of nutrition and healthcare in the country, it's easy to see why a working class kid will get forced into test books rather than playing football. Academics are simply a much surer bet for ensuring a decent standard of living for such a family. Your kid is probably better at cramming information on how to solve titration problems than he is at playing football, or at least playing football to the point where he'll earn a good salary. Although on looking at the proportion of aspirants that make it to the IITs, maybe not. This brings us to the final problem that Indian football faces: poor governance at the club level and especially at the level of the All India Football Federation, or AIFF. And there are myriad examples of this, from forcing fans to stand for hours on end just to buy tickets for qualifying games, or just not releasing them online when they were supposed to be released, to failing to give a club assurances of adequate security after an attack on a military base nearby, or failing to provide the broadcasting of matches time after time after time after time, to essentially subverting India's existing football league because they received heaps of money from one of India's richest families. There are an infinite number of examples of the AIFF utterly failing to do their job. Over the past few decades, the AIFF has been run primarily by politically connected businessmen who have given pretty much no attention to the actual development or promotion of football in the country, and none of them have had any expertise in football, not in running the club, not in being a director, not in being a player, not in being a manager. However, this might be set to change, given the Supreme Court's decision removing Prafull Patel and demanding that a new constitution be drafted in accordance with India's National Sports Code. The new constitution does look promising, with points of mandating that tournaments be played in every state, mandatorily recording and documenting meetings, putting in place strict term limits, and having a heavy emphasis on player participation. There have also been opportunities for fan groups and others to give suggestions on the Constitution to help gauge the feeling of the fans, so maybe things might change for the better. But considering that many of the problems of the administration extend to the state and district FAs as well, I wouldn't hold your breath. It's no secret that Indian football has a lot of problems. A country of 1.3 billion people having never qualified once for the World Cup, either men's or women's, screams that something is being done wrong. And I'd love to tell you that things are now picking up, that the solutions, they're all there, and that within a decade or two things will be all rainbows and sunshine. Unfortunately, that'd be a complete lie. There are promising signs, and there is definitely a zeal and a willingness from Indian football fans to work towards improving the game. And it'll be interesting to see how things like Ranjit Bajaj's Project 2034 goes, considering that his club, Minerva Punjab, has a record of producing some of India's brightest prospects, but unfortunately we'll have to wait and see. All the problems that I've listed here, lack of support, governance, culture, lack of exposure, poor coaching, etc., they're all interconnected, and the weakness in one exacerbates the weakness in all the others. Where and when this vicious cycle will be broken, only time will tell. In the meantime, let's just all be happy that we qualified for the Asian Cup, even though we'll probably get destroyed because we're in pot 4.